The sun was dipping low over the sleepy town of Oak Ridge, casting long, orange shadows across Grandma Eleanor's porch. Now, Eleanor wasn't your average sit-and-knit kind of lady. Back in the day, she was the life of the party, but lately, the vibes had been pretty lonely. Her husband Silas had kicked the bucket years ago, and her kids, well, they'd moved to the big city, chasing clout and fat paychecks, leaving Eleanor in that big old creaky wooden house all by herself. It was a real empty nest situation, and the silence was starting to get loud. One rainy Tuesday, when the sky was looking extra gloomy, Eleanor heard a pathetic little whimper coming from the edge of her yard. She stepped out, squinting through the drizzle, and spotted him, a scruffy, gold-colored dog that looked like he'd been through the ringer. He was soaking wet, shivering like a leaf, and looked totally beat. Most people in town would have called him a stray and kept on driving, but Eleanor had a heart of gold. "Hey there, buddy," she cooed, reaching out a hand. "You look like you've had a rough one." She brought him inside, dried him off with a fluffy towel, and served up a bowl of warm milk and some leftover chicken. She named him Teddy. She didn't know it yet, but this mutt was about to flip her world upside down. Teddy wasn't like other dogs. He didn't chase his tail or bark at the mailman. He was low-key and weirdly observant. He'd just sit there, staring at Eleanor with these deep, soulful eyes like he was trying to tell her something. But the weirdest part? Teddy was obsessed with the old storage room in the back of the house. Every night, while Eleanor was catching some Z's, Teddy would sneak over there and start scratching at the floorboards. "Cut it out, Teddy. You're gonna give me a headache," Eleanor would holler from her bedroom, thinking there was just a rat or some pests under the house. She had no clue that Teddy was onto something. Then came the night that changed everything, the night the glow-up turned into a burn-down. It was around 2 a.m., and the whole neighborhood was dead quiet. Eleanor was zonked out, dreaming of better days, but in the kitchen a faulty wire started sparking. Within minutes, the old wooden walls were catching fire. The smoke was thick, black, and totally sketchy. Eleanor was still out cold, oblivious to the fact that her house was turning into a furnace. Teddy didn't hesitate. He started barking his head off, but Eleanor was a heavy sleeper. Realizing she wasn't waking up, Teddy jumped onto her bed and started tugging at her blanket with his teeth, growling and nudging her. "What? Teddy, what is it?" Eleanor groaned, rubbing her eyes. Then she smelled it. She saw the orange glow creeping under the door. Her heart started doing 100 miles per hour. Oh my God, the house is on fire. She panicked, but Teddy stayed cool as a cucumber. He grabbed the hem of her nightgown and pulled her toward the back exit, weaving through the smoke like he knew exactly where the safe spots were. They barely made it out onto the grass before the roof caved in with a deafening crash. Eleanor sat there on the wet grass, watching her life's memories go up in flames. The sirens were wailing in the distance, but it was too late. The fire department arrived, but the house was toast. "We lost everything, Teddy," she sobbed, hugging the dog tight. "We're totally broke. I don't even have a place to sleep tonight. It's all gone." But Teddy wasn't crying. He was staring intensely at the smoking ruins of that storage room, the same spot he'd been scratching at for weeks. While the firemen were spraying water on the embers, Teddy ran over to the debris and started digging like a maniac. Everyone thought the dog was just tripping from the trauma. But Eleanor knew Teddy didn't do anything without a reason. As the smoke cleared, she saw something glinting under the charred floorboards that the fire had partially melted away. Silas, her husband, had been a hustler back in his day, always talking about a rainy day fund. Eleanor thought he was just capping, but as she walked closer to where Teddy was digging, she realized the fire hadn't taken everything. In fact, it had just uncovered a secret that had been hidden for decades. Teddy barked a sharp, triumphant sound. He had saved her life, yeah, but he was about to do way more than that. He was about to show her that their destiny was just getting started. The fire trucks were finally packing up, their sirens replaced by the low, haunting crackle of cooling embers. The air smelled like burnt cedar and lost dreams. Grandma Eleanor was huddled in a donated blanket, looking like a total hot mess, but her eyes were glued to Teddy. The pup was going ham on a specific patch of charred flooring where the old storage room used to be. He wasn't just digging. He was on a mission. "Teddy, chill out, honey," Eleanor whispered, her voice cracking. "The house is baked. There's nothing left to save." But Teddy didn't get the memo. He let out a sharp, bossy bark and pulled at a piece of half-burnt plywood with his teeth. Beneath the ash, a metallic glint caught the moonlight. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. She stumbled over the debris, her slippers getting ruined in the soot, and knelt beside him. There, nestled in a secret hollow beneath the foundation, was a heavy, rusted iron box. It looked like something straight out of a vintage heist movie. "No way," Eleanor breathed, her eyes going wide. "Silas, you old dog. You weren't capping after all." She remembered Silas, her late husband, always talking about security and looking out for the fam. Everyone thought he was just being extra, but seeing this box, Eleanor realized he had a side hustle she never knew about. The lock was busted from the heat, so she pried it open with a shaky hand. Inside wasn't just some spare change. It was a stack of old, crisp bills, genuine old-school cash, and a velvet pouch that felt heavy. When she opened the pouch, out spilled a collection of rare, high-grade diamonds. We're talking ice so bright it could blind you. There was also a handwritten note, yellowed with age, that simply said, "For a rainy day. I knew you'd find this when the time was right. Ted, hey." "He didn't find this, Silas," Eleanor sobbed, looking at the dog. "Teddy found it. This little guy is the real MVP." But the glow-up didn't stop there. As Eleanor sat in the back of a neighbor's car that night, clutching the box, she noticed Teddy looking out the window at the town's main character, a local greedy developer named Mr. Sterling. Sterling had been trying to buy Eleanor's land for years to build a soulless shopping mall, offering her pennies on the dollar. He was standing across the street, looking at the ruins of her house with a smug, "I told you so" look on his face. He probably figured she'd have to sell now just to survive. "He thinks I'm down bad," Eleanor muttered to Teddy. "He thinks I'm gonna fold." The next morning, the news of the miracle dog had already spread through Oak Ridge like a viral TikTok. People were calling Teddy a hero for saving Eleanor, but they didn't know about the ice in the box. Eleanor decided to keep that part low-key. She checked into a local motel, but she wasn't planning on staying there for long. With the cash and the diamonds, she didn't just have enough to rebuild, she had enough to flex. She called up a high-end architect and told him she wanted a house that would make the whole town shake. But she had one specific request. "I want a custom, 5-star suite built into the master bedroom, for the king of the house." Teddy, sitting on the motel bed, let out a satisfied woof. However, things were about to get sketchy. Mr. Sterling wasn't about to let the land go that easily. He knew Eleanor didn't have insurance, or so he thought, and he started playing dirty. That afternoon, a shady lawyer showed up at her motel door with a stack of papers, claiming that the city was condemning her land due to safety hazards from the fire. "You got 48 hours to vacate the property and sell it to Mr. Sterling, or the city takes it for nothing," the lawyer said, looking all pressed in his cheap suit. She was just an old lady, and these guys were sharks. But then she felt a warm weight on her foot. Teddy was standing there, his ears perked up, growling low in his throat. He stared at the lawyer's briefcase, then at the lawyer's face, and did something he'd never done before. He bit the lawyer's pant leg and pulled him toward the door. "Get this mutt off me," the lawyer yelled, looking totally clapped. "He's not a mutt," Eleanor said, a new fire in her eyes. "He's my legal counsel. And we're not selling. Not now, not ever." As the lawyer scrambled away, Eleanor realized that the fire hadn't just uncovered Silas's treasure. It had uncovered her own main character energy. But she still had a huge problem. How was she going to fight a millionaire developer and a corrupt city council? She looked at Teddy. The dog wasn't looking at her anymore. He was staring at the iron box, specifically at a small hidden compartment at the very bottom that Eleanor had missed in her excitement. "There's more?" she asked, her heart racing. Teddy nudged a small tarnished key that had fallen out of the box. It wasn't for a house or a car. It had a logo on it, the logo of the local Oak Ridge Historical Society, which Silas used to be the president of. "The plot thickens," Eleanor whispered. The destiny Teddy was leading her toward wasn't just about money. It was about a secret that could take down Mr. Sterling and save the whole town. But she had to move fast before Sterling's goons clamped her land for good. The sun hadn't even fully clocked in the next morning when Grandma Eleanor and Teddy were already on the move. Eleanor was feeling a mix of main character energy and straight-up nerves. She was rocking a pair of oversized shades and an old trench coat, clutching that tarnished key like it was her life support. Behind them, the ruins of her house were still smoldering, a grim reminder that Mr. Sterling was waiting like a vulture to swoop in and snatch her land. "All right, Teddy, let's see if we can find out what Silas was really cooking back in the day," Eleanor whispered as she pulled her beat-up sedan into the parking lot of the Oak Ridge Historical Society. The Historical Society was a dusty old vibe, creaky floors, smelling like old paper and mothballs. The lady at the front desk, Mrs. Gable, was a Karen of the highest order, always looking for a reason to shush someone. She looked at Eleanor and her scruffy dog like they were something she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. "No pets allowed, Eleanor. You know the rules. Don't be extra," Mrs. Gable huffed, adjusting her spectacles. But Teddy wasn't having it. He didn't bark. He just gave her this look, a cold, calculated stare that actually made Mrs. Gable flinch. She marched straight to the private archives in the basement, Teddy leading the way like he had the building's GPS downloaded into his brain. Down in the basement, it was straight-up spooky. Rows and rows of locked metal cabinets filled the room. Eleanor pulled out the key Teddy had nudged her toward. Her hands were shaking. "If this doesn't fit, we're down bad, Teddy," she muttered. She found a drawer labeled Property Records 1950 to 1970 and slid the key into the lock. It clicked. Pure satisfaction. Inside was a thick file with her husband Silas's handwriting all over it. As she flipped through the pages, her jaw literally hit the floor. "Oh my God, Teddy, look at this," she gasped. The file contained original blueprints and environmental surveys of the town. Sterling wanted to build his mall on Eleanor's land, and the surrounding forest was actually a protected wetland with a massive underground spring that supplied the town's water. But that wasn't even the tea. The real shook moment was a document showing that Mr. Sterling's grandfather had illegally moved the boundary lines decades ago to steal land from the town. Wait, it gets even crazier. There was a second deed hidden in the back. Silas had quietly bought the mineral rights to the entire area before he passed. That meant Mr. Sterling couldn't dig a single hole for his mall without Eleanor's permission. He wasn't just a bully, he was a fraud. "Sterling thinks he's the GOAT, but he's actually clownin'," Eleanor laughed, tears pricking her eyes. "He tried to burn us out, but he just set fire to his own empire." Suddenly, the basement door creaked open. Teddy's fur stood on end, and he let out a low, menacing growl. Standing there in the shadows was Mr. Sterling himself, looking pressed and holding a cigar. He had followed them. "Give me the file, Eleanor," Sterling said, his voice dropping an octave. "Don't make this ugly. You're an old lady with a stray dog. Nobody's gonna believe your story over mine. Just take the payout and ghost this town." He stepped forward, looking like he was ready to throw hands to get that folder. Eleanor backed away, her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt trapped. But Teddy? Teddy wasn't scared. He stepped right between Eleanor and the millionaire, baring his teeth in a way that looked straight up savage. "You think you're the big man on campus, Sterling?" Eleanor said, her voice gaining strength as she hugged the file to her chest. "But you forgot one thing. This stray saved me from a fire you probably started, and he's about to save this whole town from you." Teddy let out a roar, not a bark, but a soul-shaking roar, and lunged toward Sterling. He didn't bite him, but he chased him right back toward the stairs, nipping at his expensive leather shoes until the developer tripped over a box of old records, looking totally clapped. Eleanor grabbed Teddy's collar. "Come on, buddy. We gotta get this to the sheriff before Sterling's goons show up to delete the evidence." They dashed out of the Historical Society, leaving a fuming Mr. Sterling behind in the dust. But as they jumped into the car, Eleanor noticed a black SUV pulling out behind them, Sterling wasn't giving up. He was low-key sending his hit squad to finish the job. "Hold on tight, Teddy," Eleanor yelled, hitting the gas. "It's about to get bumpy." The chase was on. An 80-year-old grandma, a hero dog, and a file that could change the map of Oak Ridge forever. The destiny Silas had planned for them was finally unfolding, and it was pure chaos. The tires of Eleanor's old sedan screeched as she floored it out of the Historical Society parking lot. In the rearview mirror, that black SUV was glued to her bumper, and she could see two guys in suits looking mad sus. Eleanor took a deep breath, yanked the steering wheel, and dived into the trees. The SUV followed, but they were struggling with the tight turns and the low-hanging branches. Eleanor, who had lived in Oak Ridge her whole life, knew these woods like the back of her hand. She was drifting that old sedan like a pro, dust clouds billowing up behind her to blind the goons. "How you like them apples, Sterling?" She laughed, feeling a rush of adrenaline. Suddenly, the road ended at a washed-out bridge. Eleanor slammed on the brakes, stopping just inches from the edge. The black SUV pulled up behind them, blocking their escape. Two guys stepped out, looking salty as they straightened their jackets. "End of the line, Grandma," one of them smirked, reaching for his waistband. "Just hand over the folder, and nobody has to get clapped." Eleanor clutched the file to her chest, her eyes darting around for a plan B. She felt cornered, down bad, and totally vulnerable. But then she looked at Teddy. The dog was looking at a small hidden trail to the left, a path only a dog or a hiker could take. "Teddy, go! Run! Get the file to the sheriff," she whispered, trying to shove the folder under his collar. But Teddy wouldn't ghost her. He stepped in front of Eleanor, his growl sounding like a literal chainsaw. Just as the goons stepped closer, a loud, soul-piercing whistle echoed through the trees. Out of the shadows stepped a group of old-timers, the local veterans of Oak Ridge, led by none other than the sheriff's retired father. They were all holding cameras and phones, recording everything. "Looks like you boys are tripping on private property," the old man said, his voice icy. "And we're currently live streaming this whole situation to the town's Facebook group." The goons froze. They knew they were caught in 4K. They didn't want to catch a felony on camera. So they scrambled back into their SUV and peeled out, leaving Eleanor and Teddy in a cloud of dust. "You guys, you saved us," Eleanor gasped, leaning against her car. "Nah, Eleanor," the old man smiled, pointing at Teddy. "This little guy alerted us. He ran to my porch an hour ago, barked like the world was ending, and led us right here. He's the real goat." Eleanor looked at Teddy, her eyes filling with tears. "You really are built different, aren't you?" But the final boss was still waiting. Sterling was probably at the sheriff's office right now, trying to buy his way out of the mess. Eleanor grabbed the file and hopped back into the car. "Let's go, Teddy. It's time to cancel Mr. Sterling once and for all." As they drove toward town, Eleanor noticed a small hidden pocket inside the folder she hadn't seen before. She pulled out a tiny USB drive with a label that made her blood run cold. Sterling's secret ledger. This wasn't just about land anymore. This was federal-level tea. The drive into town felt like a scene straight out of a blockbuster movie. Eleanor's hands were shaking as she gripped the steering wheel, but Teddy was chill, sitting in the passenger seat like he was ready for a victory lap. As they pulled up to the sheriff's office, the place was buzzing with reporters and curious locals who had seen the live stream. "Stay close, Teddy. We're about to spill the tea of the century," Eleanor whispered, tucking the USB drive and the file under her arm. As they walked through the glass doors, the room went dead quiet. Standing by the front desk was Mr. Sterling, looking fancy in his $5,000 suit, surrounded by 3 lawyers who looked like they were ready to sue the air. He was leaning over Sheriff Miller, pointing a finger and looking totally pressed. "I'm telling you, Sheriff, that woman is delusional, and her dog is a public nuisance," Sterling shouted. "She's trespassing on my future development site, and I want her canceled immediately." Sheriff Miller, a man who usually moved at the speed of dial-up internet, looked exhausted. But then he saw Eleanor and Teddy. "Actually, Sterling, I think you should take a seat," Eleanor said, her voice sounding bossy and confident. She walked straight past the lawyers and slammed the folder onto the sheriff's desk. "Because I've got the receipts to show who's really the villain in this town." Sterling's face went from pale to straight-up purple. "That's just old paper, Eleanor. It's irrelevant." "Maybe the paper is old," Eleanor smirked, pulling out the tiny USB drive. "But this is brand new information." She handed the drive to the sheriff. "My husband Silas wasn't just a record keeper. He was low-key investigating your family for years, Sterling. This drive contains the digital footprint of every bribe you've paid to the city council to get your mall approved." The room went chaotic. Sterling tried to ghost the office, making a run for the door, but Teddy wasn't having it. The dog let out a thunderous bark and blocked the exit, his fur standing up like he was ready for smoke. Sterling tripped over his own feet, falling flat on his face in front of the local news cameras. It was pure comedy. "Looks like your reputation just hit zero, Sterling," the sheriff said, finally standing up and pulling out his handcuffs. "You're under arrest for fraud, bribery, and if we find proof of that fire, arson." As the deputies led a sobbing Sterling away, the crowd outside started cheering. Eleanor felt like a legend. She sat down on the bench, her legs feeling like jelly, and pulled Teddy into a massive hug. "We did it, buddy. You saved the house, you saved the town, and you saved me," she whispered into his fur. But as the excitement settled, Eleanor realized she still didn't have a home. Everything was ash. She looked at the diamonds in the box and knew she could buy any house in the state, but she didn't want a mansion. She wanted her vibe back. Suddenly, a local billionaire, a guy who had been Sterling's rival, stepped forward. "Eleanor, that was legendary. I want to help you rebuild your house, and I want to turn that wetland into a Teddy Hero Park for the whole town to enjoy. No strings attached, just positive vibes only." Eleanor's heart was full. Her destiny wasn't just about finding a treasure, it was about finding a purpose. But then, Teddy did something extra. He nudged her hand again and looked toward the back of the sheriff's office, where a small, shivering stray puppy was sitting in a cage. "You want me to help him too?" Eleanor asked, her eyes tearing up. Teddy let out a soft, happy woof. "All right, buddy. Looks like we're starting a rescue mission empire."